Baby boomers. As much as we younger generations like to dunk on them from time to time, they did completely remake our society in multiple different ways. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. And one way I think that was ultimately for worse is religion. Before the boomers, the churches that dominated America and Europe were the old main line. Protestant denominations, think of your Episcopalians, United Church of Christ, or the Catholic Church. And these were the dominant churches in America and Europe. But the boomers left those churches in large numbers because they found them uninspiring. Think of things like the Jesus movement. And at least here in America, it was a different story in Europe. They joined the evangelical church in very large numbers, and from the Catholic Church and from the main lines. And these churches went through precipitous decline over the last few decades. And essentially, the evangelicals became the dominant form of Christianity in America for 50 odd years now. And they really went to their heyday in the 80s with things like the Mormon majority. I'm not mistaken, about 1983 is when evangelicals overtake mainline Protestants as the largest Protestants in America. And they just dominate for the last 50 years as dominant, powerful voices. And then all sorts of reactions. Let's think of New Atheism. New Atheism was very much an anti-evangelical movement. And then in more recent years, we have things like the deconstruction movement, which is, once again, mostly anti-evangelical. People are leaving evangelicalism in very large numbers. And the religion, I think, has just gained a bad reputation with younger people and people outside of the church. A lot of people are increasingly thinking negative opinions of evangelicals, and rightfully so, I think. This form of Christianity is very, very detached from just Christianity, like, ever. Like, everything else that is Christian, like, actually resembles historic Christianity to some extent. Evangelicals really don't. Their churches look like bars. Their music sounds like secular pop music, but they just swapped the word baby for Jesus. Believe it or not, even though they claim to be all about the Bible, the word is really removed from their service. The only time you'll probably hear the Bible in the service is when the preacher reads for his sermon. The rest of it is they have no more readings. They don't have prayers. The hymns are untheologically connected. Evangelicals don't believe in the sacraments. They do not believe in the Eucharist, so they don't believe it's the body and blood of Christ. It's just a symbol. In fact, really the only sacrament, especially in a lot of megachurches, you find is baptism. A lot of megachurches don't even do marriages. So that's a horrible tragedy. And you just see this. This church is very much disconnected. These churches also struggle from a lot of scandals, greed and such. And this church is just, I think, gained a lot of bad reputation. A lot of people are fed up with it. And a lot of people are just leaving. And just broader American culture in general just has a bad reputation for it. So what do I think will replace this form of Christianity? Well, I think a few different ones, but I think the biggest will be the trads. What are trads? Trad is just short for traditional, but being Gen Z, we got to shorten it or make some weird word for it. But just it's trad, traditionalist. And it's a movement really centered in churches like the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church, which are Latin Mass Catholics, and more recently conservative Protestants. And this is really a movement to bring back traditions, to go back to the church fathers, to go back to the great saints of the church, and if you're a Protestant, to go back also to the reformers. And it's really a movement to go back to history and worship, rejecting the evangelicals' ugly building, going back for a more beautiful building, more reverent worship, a return to sacraments. Also, it tends to be more welcome intellectual tradition. Evangelical Christianity is the most anti-intellectual form of Christianity in the world. It's very anti-education. It's very anti-being connected to all the great doctors and saints of the church. It tends to be very conspiratorial. Now, a lot of trads do deny evolution, but a lot don't. It's not as big a deal, in my experience, with trads as it would be in the evangelical church, where you can get called a heretic for not being a younger creationist. And just a lot of people are starting to leave evangelical Christianity and migrate into this new form of Christianity, trad Christianity, which isn't really new. It's just returning to what is old. So what are the big reasons I think this form of Christianity will become the dominant form of Christianity in our culture? For one, they know how to use the internet. Operation Reconquista is a wonderful example of this. But just look at memes. A lot of trad memes are a thing. There are a bunch of trad channels. I think of course, Redeemed Zoomer, but also Young Anglican. I think of Based Lutheran. These are smaller channels, I think of bigger chants like Orthodox Kyle. I think of people like Jay Dahmer. I think of Gavin Ortland. He's a bit older, but he's also part of this movement. I think of Calvin Robinson. He's also a bit older, but once again, a part of this movement and very important. And there's also other trad Catholics like Gen Z Catholic, and a lot of other figures that are utilizing the internet for their own benefit. And I'm sure there's TikTok stars and stuff, but I just don't really see any real equivalent in the evangelical world right now. I just don't see any. I don't know of any real major Gen Z evangelical Christian channels. I know there are some Gen Z TikTokers and stuff, but TikTokers are no equivalent to people with brain power. So it just seems to be that all the intellectual might is moving into the trad world. Or we even see the trad beliefs creeping up into the evangelical church. For instance, Francis Chan, famous evangelical minister, recently, a few years ago, came to believe in the real presence in Christ in the Eucharist. And these kind of beliefs are starting to spread more. Evangelicals are becoming more open to tradition. For instance, my parents are Wesleyans. That's an evangelical church, Holiness Church. And there was a minister at our summer camp. And he clearly been studying his church history because he constantly was starting to make references to like church traditions and things in his talking. And at the end of the summer camp, he did the ritual where they had the olive oil and they had the sign of the cross on your head, which is clearly a sign that even that these traditions are starting to creep into the evangelical world. Evangelicals, I also think, are just kind of screwed because of just how increasingly decentralized they are. Evangelical Christianity is really just kind of sandblasted away everything except for the Bible, and that really includes the church. Non-denominationalism is the future of evangelical Christianity for the most part, and non-denominationalism is very decentralized, broken into a million pieces. And I really do think that's the future of the evangelical church, broken into a million different pieces, very decentralized, very scattered, all over the place, and a lot of different opinions and stuff there. I just think a form of Christianity that's broken into a million pieces really can't be powerful or dominant. Meanwhile, the trads are organizing. Operation Reconquista, I already talked about it, I believe, in this video, is an excellent example. I keep talking about it a lot because it really is an example of what is to come. A mass organization of young people into a movement. I just think of the massive spreading of Orthodoxy right now. Orthodoxy is growing massively in America, and it's declined some because of people from Eastern European backgrounds that leave the church when they get here, or their children or grandkids leave. But a lot of Americans are moving into that kind of church massively. It's drawing a lot of people. Trad Catholics, I know, get a lot of converts. A lot of people like the Latin Mass. And a lot of traditional Protestants are starting to get a following. I talked about this huge new traditional Protestant movement that's really growing. I know that a lot of Anglican churches are doing very well. And out of all the Protestant churches, I don't know if you can call them Protestants, but Anglicans, I think, will do the best because they're the middle way between Catholic and Protestant. They can claim apostolic succession. They Orthodox recognize them as having apostolic succession. They have sacramental theology. They also tend to be more ecumenical, so people who are into a one true church theology will like that. They also practice open communion, which I think will be more popular. I could see the Lutherans doing very well because they once again are very historically rooted, and they have a major conservative denomination in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, so that could do well. I could see Methodists doing somewhat well. I think this is a massive pain of the United Methodist breakup. This could drive excellence. The Asbury Revival of 2023 was a Methodist revival. And just this new trad movement is rising up. It has the benefit of being connected to the church history. I think in the increasingly modern and secular world, that churches are going to kind of need religions to have legitimacy are going to need to prove a sense of ancientness and transcendence above the world. Evangelical Christianity just does not have that. It feels just like the world. They look just like the world. A ton of scandals and such, but also just the buildings, the worship, everything's very worldly. Meanwhile, the trads are very much extra worldly. The principle of traditional worship is that we should have a piece of the kingdom of heaven now on this earth. So old worship is very reverent. It feels like heaven. And I think that will only become increasingly popular in an incredibly spiritually dead world. They also just have a massive benefit of being connected to 2,000 years of church history when evangelicals just don't. And I definitely think that the Operation Reconquista, which I've talked about multiple times on this channel, because it's such a big deal, I think, to the future, will not be 100% successful in taking denominations, but I do think they'll take congregations, and therefore they'll have a lot of very beautiful buildings in their hands. and have a lot of very high reverent worship in it. And a lot of conservatives just tend to build very beautiful buildings as well. Um, so they have the beautiful worship, which is very transcendent and otherworldly, and that will help draw a lot of people into Christianity. Um, Another thing I've said before is I think the Billy Grahams and the Fold Machines of this generation will be people who were born non-religious. This is because you have to really make the faith your own, and increasingly, faith under persecution will increasingly have to, prove its legitimacy. Have people who constantly have to fight for it, and I think that that will be ultimately more successful and will drive a much stronger church. The trads also have young men. Young men is a big deal because fathers play a massive role in how faithful a household will be. If the father is religious, typically the family tends to follow. So that's a big deal. And therefore, all these young men that the trads are getting under their wing today are the fathers of tomorrow. That's another big benefit. Trad culture tends to encourage having lots of children. I think the trad wives, that's another example of how trads are able to utilize the internet, how their women are able to utilize the internet, because most trad wives are Christians and they are part of a traditionalist Christian movement. Um, and they're able to utilize the internet very well. And they've really broken into the mainstream over the last year, I think. Um, so that's a good example of how trads are able to utilize the internet and how able to influence our major culture. But they have the young men, and they are starting families and having lots of children. And really, just young people can have a lot of influence. If you're Gen Z listening, you have so much more influence than anyone of older generations because the church is hemorrhaging and dying in the West at the moment. And you can just walk into an older congregation, and you just one person can have so much influence because you're young, and that's huge. Especially if you're able to start a family, then you can have immense influence. If you have children, you have a huge amount of influence in the church. Um, and as the church continues to hemorrhage and die, people who young people can have so much influence. You can have so much more influence than you ever could have in the past. I mean, I just some random dude. I don't have much following, but I'm able to have a lot more influence than people in the past could have because I can just film myself talking about something, and then the whole world can see it. And that's a good example of how young people utilizing the internet and also utilizing the decline of the church can have immense amount of influence. Just one person really can have an immense amount of influence. And these trads are organizing. Once again, the evangelicals are breaking up into a million different pieces, becoming non-denominationals, and every man his own pope, essentially. Meanwhile, the trads are organizing into massive movements. Who do I think will do the best? I think Orthodoxy will do the best because they, once again, have all these trad folk. They don't have to deal with the baggage of liberalism that some of the Protestant churches and even the Catholic Church has to deal with. Orthodoxy has rebounded wonderfully from its persecution in Eastern Europe of the last century. Countries like Russia and Ukraine are once a majority Orthodox. And in the West, um, Orthodoxy is massively spreading. When I went to Orthodox Church, I met a whole family of Lutherans that were converting in, and a Baptist from New York. So I know that a lot of people are becoming Orthodox, and it's growing like wildfire. I do think that the Orthodox Church, part due to the high fertility, part due to lots of conversions, will become one of the large churches in America by the time I'm an old man. Several million members, I believe. Um, Also, I think trad Catholics will do very well. The church is likely going to become more centered in Africa in the future, which is very conservative. We'll likely have a black pope by the end of the century. So that will help out trads a lot by being more traditional. They'll be more cool with the Latin Mass. And various traditional Protestant sects, I think, will do well. I already talked about Anglicans, I think, will do the best because they're kind of the middle ground. But also, I do think various other Protestant sects will do exceptionally well. What do I think of the downsides of the trad movement? What are the things will detract from it? Women. A lot of women, I think that the debate over what role should women have in the church, they have full equality, as some very traditional people do believe, or should they be fully subjugated, not have any real role in the church, and of course, besides as mothers and maybe nuns, as a lot of traditionalists also believe, and I think that will be a big issue. Um, Also, LGBT acceptance. The evangelical church has massively struggled because of how it failed to handle the LGBT issue. It's driven a lot of queer people out of the church and it's hurt a lot of queer people. If you want to know more, watch my video about the church failed LGBT people. But trads are very, very anti woke, as I like to say. And to them, dunking on the queer movement is just a part of being trad. And I do think that if trads ever have any major real power, they kind of can't stop that queer people are going to be born into their churches. And I do think that if the trads fumble the ball on this one, which they probably will, that a few decades from now we'll be hearing a lot of stories of trad abuse of queer people in the same way that we hear stories of evangelical abuse of queer people today. And I hate to see that, but it's likely going to happen. Um, so the trads, if they fumble the ball on that, that will really come back to bite them in a few decades when the Zoomers are older men. But I do think, though, that trads are going to have lots of kids. They have all the young men. They're able to utilize the internet exceptionally well, and they're able to organize a lot of different things. They also just have beautiful worship, and they're well connected with tradition. Um, One other thing, I guess you could say another thing I think that will divide them is different views on hell. I know that beliefs in annihilationism are steadily growing in the evangelical world, and it would not surprise me if annihilation continues to gain in popularity because I know a lot of them Catholics believe in that too. I know a strong belief in eternal damnation is very strong for being a trad right now, but it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of trads start studying history and start studying universalist apologetics, since we seem to be a pretty popular group to dunk on. And if you're a trad listening and you want to know more about Christian Universalism, I think you would probably enjoy my videos. Orthodox Kyle is wrong about Christian Universalism, and Redeemed Zoomer is wrong about Christian Universalism, or Universalism, I suppose, which is the title. You would probably enjoy those videos. Um, well, I think that's about all for today. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good day. God bless. And I record these videos in nature because I think everyone sings the praises of God out here. So, God and nature, God is good. He loves you.